Hello and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. I'm your co-host, Nathan Rittenhouse.
And I'm your co-host, Cameron McAllister.
And we're going to talk about the election, and we're going to say we told you so, but not in the category you were expecting. So, obviously, our last episode was a reflection on the election that we recorded before the election had happened. We talked about general responses to kind of a Christian posture to processing whoever becomes the next president, and all of that has been clarified in the meantime. But if you think back further than that, in our podcast list, do you remember when we did an episode talking about the end of traditional media and the importance of podcast and all these other forms of communication? Well, I would say if this election proved anything, one of those was the resounding degree that turned out to be more true than even we knew what we were talking about at the time. So just a phenomenal shift in, and then an understanding in like who's listening to whom, and like who really has the attention of America, and who are people actually being persuaded by, and what are the forms of communication that people feel like are actual ways to get to know somebody. And I would say it was looking pretty good for the non-traditional landscape out there, Cameron. So reflections from you real quick on that, but then what does this mean moving forward? We'll see.
Yes. Well, I think you've had for a long time a growing dissatisfaction. It's not just traditional forms of media. I think there's been a whole lot of focus on cultural elites lately, and this is not just restricted to the United States. So one analyst and philosopher whose opinion I value is John Gray. He has a regular column in the New Statesman now, and he's in England. But he points out that Trump in the United States, Viktor Orban in Hungary, or the Brexit vote in his native UK, these are not happening in a vacuum, and they're not isolated incidents. They are reactions on the part of people who feel increasingly marginalized and also ignored by the leadership of their countries. And they have now, in our internet era, they have found creative ways to speak back and indeed to fight back and to take big risks.
Can I give you a little bit of a so think about this as a kind of a visual image for how this might practically or logistically work itself out. So last time I looked for 2024, Trump won 2,552 counties. So 2,552 counties voted for Trump. 382 voted for Kamala. So you're looking at almost eight times as many counties voted for Trump. Yep. And the popular vote is still close. If you look at those 382 counties that voted for Kamala, 60% of the nation's GDP comes out of those 382 counties. And I would say that the vast majority of traditional media is rooted in those 382 counties. And so you're seeing an ever increasing, this is part of the people are like, well, why are people complaining about the economy? The stock market's doing great. And then you think, okay, wait a second. 90% of the stocks in the United States are owned by 1% of the population. So you have these little, if you look at a map of red and blue counties, you would say there's a tiny minority of blue counties, 380 to over 2,500. However, if you look at the total population in those areas, it's close. And then you look at the influence that those small geographic areas have and the disproportionate impact that they have on hosting a kind of our financial institutions, our technological institutions, and then our communication institutions. You can see how you easily get yourself set up for an imbalance in representation. And so you're almost back to the kind of revolution of like taxation without representation. There's like a semi or quasi media version of that happening right now. Although, I mean, it's not like Joe Rogan lives in West Virginia or Kansas. It's still based in and rooted in some of these higher urban, areas. But it is a definite shakeup in the snow globe of who gets to speak, who gets to be heard, and then what gets to be said.
Yeah. And I mean, Kamala Harris could not have been more associated with all of that. I mean, essentially everything you just named. The whole legacy media, major, cultural apparatus and machinery, all of that was behind her. But again, the internet has basically quickened a new populist movement. And I mean, again, we've seen, I think, the first real murmuring of this that we saw a while back. And also, by the way, this will prove just how unpredictable it really was. But if you could think back all the way to the Arab Spring, I think a lot of people, this was largely the major culprit there in all of those in that mobilization was social media. So, but again, the end result of all of this is kind of going to be wildly unpredictable. So when I think it certainly seems to be the case, Nathan, that any kind of victories right now are usually quite small and short-lived because everybody's always gathering their forces and their ammunition and strategizing to come back. Although I do have to say, Nathan, I mentioned this to you earlier, the early responses from Democrats and progressives have been a little bit more of the same. Sort of, oh gosh, look at this. The influence of, uneducated white men is ruining this country. So in other words, more words of just contempt and dismissal for all of these idiots and yokels. If only they were as enlightened and compassionate and smart as we were, they would be able to act in their best interests. And so it's more of the same. And in fact, that's the kind of rhetoric that turned many formerly card-carrying Democrats against their own party. So just a few thoughts there.
Well, and so, I mean, you see that reflected. You've probably followed the discussion where you have the Democrats saying like, well, the Democrats just don't have a Joe Rogan. And everybody's like, Joe Rogan voted for Bernie Sanders last time. Like the Democrats did have a Joe Rogan and they lost him. And so it's not just the platforms, it's the shifts that you're seeing. That if you haven't seen it yet and you're listening to this, I would encourage you to look up the New York Times graph of the United States of how counties shifted. And it's red and blue arrows. And it's just a really fascinating, a graphic of showing how things shifted. But one of the shifts that happens in there, and I want to get you to comment on this, and maybe it's too soon to tell, is many of you will remember this very well. If you're on the younger side, maybe not. But in 2016, when Trump won, there was massive hate spewed against white evangelicals. So you listen to the Democratic response right now of why did we lose? Back in 2016, it was white Christians were the problem. That, Cameron, you can reflect on that, but that was definitely a thing. I haven't heard as much of that this round just because Trump nearly doubled the black vote. You could maybe make the case that like Hispanics in Pennsylvania won the whole thing for him. You had so many minority groups, not majority, but shifting in his direction so significantly that it seems like it's a little harder to say like, oh, this is, white Christian bigotry that is the reason for fascism or whatever, Am I missing that, or is it too soon, or has that not been emphasized as much as it was when he won in 2016?
It may be too soon to say, but I don't think it's as much of a point of emphasis. So I had predicted that Trump would win. I thought that was going to happen. What did surprise me were those demographics that you mentioned, which complicate that narrative for sure. I also think people since 2016 are a little bit weary of the whole evangelicals are destroying this country. I mean, it's been a long time, and I think it's at the time in 2016 there was still the element of surprise, and really probably a better word is shock. I think at that time, many people were legitimately shocked that evangelicals would turn out in the numbers that they did for Trump. Why? Well, by way of reminder, I think the easiest thing to point to would be something like the arguments against Bill Clinton. This was a big one for me because I moved to the United States right as the Monica Lewinsky scandal was unfolding. And it was unfolding on the news, even as I was at school. Everybody was talking about it. You can imagine. I mean, you remember, Nathan, all the jokes that were being made. And so, and this was the U.S. president. And of course, we heard the phrase over and over again, or at least I did. I have to remind myself, Nathan, you were not walking in the traditional evangelical circles, but I was at this point. I moved straight into the heartland of evangelicalism. And what I heard over and over again was character matters in our leaders. And you heard it from a number of different Christian spiritual leaders and pastors. That was on the lips of everybody. And character mattered until apparently it didn't anymore. It mattered so long as we had, yeah.
Well, hang on. So I was thinking about this because where was I reading? Shoot, I can't come up with a reference. This is in the last day or two of Bill Clinton's approval rating was higher after the scandal. So the character matters argument mattered within the church. But the point that the broader article was making is that people really judge a president based on their perception of security and the economy.
Yep.
It's totally performance. So they would say, yeah, Bill Clinton had this scandal, but people pretty much loved the economy and the state of the nation during the time. And so, yeah, this whole thing, Lewinsky, so I think he was he went from like 69 to 73% approval rating during that time because morality wasn't really the issue behind whether or not people liked the president. So Christians could say this is an issue for us. 2016 kind of knocked a hole in that, where basically Christians just joined everybody else in saying like, yeah, the moral stuff, all politicians are going to kind of be like this. But does this person provide a sense of stability and security and economic optimism? That's what really matters. So I see the whole thing, Cameron, as just, you've talked at length about the practicality of how it is that we value and judge our leaders as Americans. And I think we're just seeing that same play on repeat here.
Born out. Yeah, I mean, we as Americans, we are hardwired for pragmatism. And so our main question is usually going to be, will this work? And let's just point out, that's not a bad thing. And I mean, under ideal circumstances, of course you want something to work, and you want sound strategies and tools, and you want them to be effective. That's good. But when you reach a time of great moral crisis, where we find ourselves today in the late modern world, especially in the West, increasingly what works may involve you having to compromise your moral principles. That was very much at the forefront in 2016. These were the conversations people were having in 2016, but the nature of that has all changed now. The conversation has shifted much more to it's not so much you need to hold your nose and vote. It's a little bit more brazen than that. In some ways, it's sort of, no. Okay, look, forget all of that. I am done with having conversations about dialogue and persuasion. We are dealing with life and death issues here. We're facing a real existential crisis in this election. This is a historic election. I don't know how many times I heard that, Nathan. I'm sure you've heard that many times. This is absolutely historic.
Just to be clear,
this
was both sides. Like, you can go find the Oprah quote saying this might be the last time you.
Oh, this is everybody.
This is everybody.
Absolutely,
so just to
everybody.
Be clear,
everybody. Well, just to be clear, and so here's where I'm going to do some. I mean, let's just be equal opportunity offenders this morning and pick on both sides here. So I have heard a lot in the wake of Trump's victory, which again, I'm not a pundit or a legacy media person. I was not very surprised by it. I thought that was what was going to happen. But I've heard a lot of people, basking in that victory, lots of gloating, lots of schadenfreude, but also lots of people saying, oh, all of these liberal meltdowns. And let's face it, I mean, it's always fun to go watch somebody melt down. And there are,
you can find,
the internet being what it is, there is no.
Yeah, you can find a blue-haired kid with a Taylor Swift hat sobbing pretty quickly.
Exactly. So lots of videos of people. Yeah, there are lots of blue-haired kids sobbing in Taylor Swift t-shirts. It's true. Is it fun? Is it fun and funny to watch it? Yeah. Is it good for you? Probably not. But there's a lot of that. And so, yeah, no. But one response I've seen is, oh, look at what are you so afraid of? Why is everybody so afraid? And what the towering irony of a statement like that is, the point is everybody's afraid. The campaigns of both candidates were built on fear and paranoia. On the one hand, you have still Trump represented as an absolute fascist, And then you have Kamala Harris represented as a communist existential threat to democracy, and they're going to come for your children and they're going to destroy lives. But I mean, my point is, there are varying degrees of legitimacy to some of these concerns. But my point is, everybody was terrified. Everybody is afraid. And the people who voted for Trump, many of them, the same. They were voting largely out of, not everybody, but I mean, a significant motivating factor was real fear. So I just want to point that out. I mean,
yeah, but it's more significant than just to bring everybody along here, because Obama, do you remember his main theme? So if you're thinking about Democratic victory, Obama's campaign was run on hope. Kamala's campaign was run on fear. Biden's first one was run on not being Trump, I think. So there's a
pretty much, yeah.
If you shift from hope to fear as your motivating factor, that's not a great moral vision. We're kind of coming down to what we're against here. So that the thing that
no, but it's a very effective campaign strategy. That's the thing. Yeah,
sure. And you can grow a podcast or a media platform or even a church rooted and based in that. So yeah, we know it works.
Absolutely can. Yeah,
that's read the New Testament.
That's why it was done, because it worked.
Yeah, yeah. So, but what I don't know yet is actually, let's do two things. Let's do this in two steps. Can you go through, because Schadenfreude is such a great word, and it really spiked in the English lexicon, I think in the last decade. Talk to us about the definition of that word, because people will have, if you don't know what that is, you should know what it is. You'll see it in writing, and knowing what it is will help you avoid doing it. So, you German speaker, sort us out.
Yeah, so literally translated, Schadenfreude. Schade, it means sadness. Freude, joy. So a literal translation would be sadness, joy. But what the word and the concept is getting at is taking tremendous pleasure in the pain of your enemies, essentially, and just gloating over their pain. So yeah, pulling up videos of blue-haired kids in Taylor Swift t-shirts weeping and then making fun of them. And I mean, again, the internet is just it's not good for anybody. And, we shouldn't be sharing all of these details of our lives, and we shouldn't be laughing at everybody, but it's awful hard not to. I'll be the first to admit that. Mm-hmm. But that's Schadenfreude. And you see a whole lot of that. I mean, we're primed for it in a culture war scenario. And once again, if we just zoom out a little bit, you'll hear Nathan and I being the annoying killjoys that we always are. This is kind of, I think, in some ways our job, our calling in life, for better or for worse, and just point out that this whole big culture warring mess is really bad for everybody. It's terrible for the souls of everybody involved, because
but we all know
first of all, it really forestalls. And we all
seems weird to say that out loud.
Yeah,
but we have to.
It's not. Yeah, but it's even, if you're in a state of affairs, if you have look, we all talk about how the culture is in sharp decline, or the social bonds are fraying, the social dynamic is bad, cultural disintegration. Well, yeah, that's okay. We're all saying that, so we all know it. So, and yet we perpetuate this cycle where we just tear first of all, we see people we disagree with as not just opponents, but as enemies to be destroyed. And so then when we have some short-term victory, like a presidential election, yes, it's a short-term victory. Look, with this vitriolic, vicious culture war, here's one prediction I'll make, and I'm not a prophet, and I'm not that politically savvy, but I mean, do we really think that President Trump can reverse all of the negative dynamics of our culture, that he can pump the brakes on all of the negative outworkings of the sexual revolution, that he can stop transgenderism through Supreme Court justices? That's a completely naive view of culture. Now, I'm not saying that those items don't matter. We want sound Supreme Court justices. We do. I mean, we care deeply about these social issues, but we can't afford to be so naive as to think that just one person is going to be and again, this is everybody falling prey to this line of thinking, that we can have some kind of a political messiah who's going to reverse all of the damage that we have. while we continue to maintain this horrific, corrosive atmosphere where we all hurl insults at each other and destroy each other. And I'm not talking about, oh, here's Cameron again. We just need more dialogue. We just need more persuasion. We just need to sit down and talk about our feelings. I'm actually saying, no, we have to we need to start growing up and acting like adults again. That's what, I mean, we are a culture of total adolescence. When you have men in their 50s reposting blue-haired little, kids or whatever in their Taylor Swift shirts crying, what does that say about the status of our maturity? My goodness, we have to grow up.
So is there okay, let's bring this back around to the media angle early on. So if you think of presidential things that had the most attention given to them, so you're looking at like a Rogan podcast with over 100 million views. That thing was 3 hours long.
You know what people like about Rogan?
So
you know what I think people like?
Hang on, let me finish this thought and then give me the Rogan. Is because some people are speculating, will the next presidential election have actual presidential debates? Like, will you need candidates who can sit down for 2 hours and discuss policy with each other? Because we didn't have that. Well, we haven't had that for a little while now. Is the nature of this media shift, maybe will it take us back in a more grown-up direction if it's not just sound bites? I mean, because even when we talk about traditional or mainstream media, the liberal or conservative agendas of the organization. Like nobody's acting like they're neutral anymore. So even for an organization to be the one hosting a debate, like, oh, it's going to be slanted this way or this way. So will there be like America getting sick and tired of that? Was a glimmer of hope shown in this election that people are looking for information about candidates in non-traditional ways? And is that a good thing for the future of our political actual dialogue rather than political mud pie flinging?
Well, I don't know. I don't think we're going to throw away the formal debates and all of that. That's part of a long established tradition. It would be very difficult for me at least to see that going away entirely.
Yeah, but the debates were not like, think about the Trump Biden debate where they're arguing about who's better at golf. So I'm not saying the debate is going away. I'm just saying like that doesn't seem to have any bearing on anything that is actually relevant to people picking a candidate.
It probably hasn't had a bearing for a long time, though. I don't think. Right. I mean, I think. No, I don't think it has, because Cameron, you
popped my.
Well,
optimism.
Not necessarily crushing your hopes. I do. You won't know, because you asked, is there hope maybe for people gaining an interest in hearing actual discussions again with real policies being discussed and actual adult conversation. In other words, we did see a little bit of that. We saw that in the vice presidential debate between Vance and Tim Walz. And I heard many responses to that. I watched it. I think many people said, wow, this is a breath of fresh air. It's really refreshing. Now, there were still some of the familiar antics. The hosts were, let's just say some of the questions were a little, I think they clearly didn't like Vance. And there's just no attempt even to cover that up. And that was very clear. But it was night and day different from the presidential debates.
Okay.
No, so but here's you what had a little bit of that.
But if you put it to a vote in the United States right now, and you said, who could host a better presidential debate, Theo Vaughn or MSNBC or Fox News?
Oh, undoubtedly people would. Yeah. I mean, they would they would say Theo Vaughn or Joe Rogan, but part of what makes those guys, why? They're not scripted. That's a part of that is I don't necessarily see that. So that's not necessarily connected to all of the political dynamics of our moment. Part of that has to do with the changing social dynamics of our culture and what our technologies have done. We have come into an era. Remember, Nathan, where the word authenticity was all the rage, and everybody was talking about, you have to be authentic, and suddenly every marketing agency was trying to find ways to make their brand authentic, and But part of what people were hungry for was something that seemed real and unscripted, I think. People were tired of the slick presentations. They were tired of the TED talkers. They were tired of politicians making empty promises. So somebody who can go off script, so to speak. See, this is where Kamala Harris was at a great disadvantage. So in that debate with Trump, I think she got the upper hand very easily. She was prepared. She had her talking points, and Trump really fell apart there. But where she falls apart is anytime she has to be, basically off the cuff or candid. She just can't do that. She's a career politician. She doesn't do well off the script. And so it's no surprise that she didn't want to go on the Joe Rogan podcast. But see, that's Trump's superpower. He could do that all day long. That's what he loves to do. So he can go on there. And is he eloquent? No. In many ways, Trump talks like a buffoon half the time. Let's just be honest. I mean, if you compare him to
everybody thinks they understand
any person who's a public speaker, yes.
But that seems more normal in our time.
And that's
because it's not scripted.
Thing. It does.
Because it's not scripted.
Right.
So there's
more real.
Magic sauce.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Magic. Yeah, he's more relatable. He's more real. He's more authentic. I mean, you just pick whatever word you want to, stamp on there. So you're going to have now. One thing that's really interesting here is that somebody who can do both, I think, is J.D. Vance. He is very good. He's a really sharp guy. He's a really interesting guy. Nathan, you read Hillbilly Elegy, I believe, when it came out.
Yep.
I've not read that book yet. But he's highly articulate, but he can also sit down for an informal conversation with a beer in his hand. So and he's also, he's 40 years old. So he's pretty young. He's skilled in, so I'm saying, I think somebody like him has a long career in politics ahead for him. And I'm not necessarily saying that's a good thing for him or his soul or his family, but yeah.
Yeah. All right. So let's shift here a second, because I think by and large, if you look at, how things have unfolded and what demographics vote, that the majority of the church in North America, to some degree, enthusiastically or reluctantly voted for Trump. And that's a broad sweeping statement, but probably true. And then
probably true.
So there's a sense of like your candidate won. What's too soon to know is what that winning means. So you have to be a little careful in your Schadenfreude, just as a general principle of like, we don't know how this is going to play out in any real significant way, because you can't know the future. And Trump comes in very much as like, let's shake the snow globe kind of candidate, which if you live outside the snow globe, you want to see the snow globe shaken. We just don't know how all the snowflakes are going to fall here. So can't say. We'll set that aside of like, we'll wait and see. Shift with me here, Cameron, just to help me think through what this means so not the political thing, not the political outcome, but the change in conversation and how information is gathered, shifted, and presented. And talk to me a little bit about what you see the future of good, clear Christian communication being. Everything from sermons to small groups to thinking out loud. What are you learning from this digital media shifting change that you think is pertinent to people who are listening about how we should be diverting our attention, or some good practices if we do want to be having a voice in culture in a digital space, or just in general? What are we, or is there nothing new here and we just have to revert to some basic principles? Help me brainstorm here a little bit about the shift in Christian communication.
Well, I think there's a tremendous opportunity here for Christians, because there's a humongous hunger for depth, and the kind of depth that you're only going to get with in-person conversation. Usually, I'm not saying that you can't. I mean, podcasts and all that can be very helpful. That's why we do this podcast. We hope this is indeed helpful, and we try to model a form of discourse that we think is the antidote to what's going on around us. I'll say more about that in just a second. But people really do want to talk about the most crucial and important and pressing issues. And I find that, we talk about how polarized and angry we are. I just talked about the culture war and all of that. That's true on the one hand, and it's certainly true in online circles, but online is not necessarily the real world. When you meet people or talk to people face to face, your family and all of that, you're going to find that it often, yes, some of those conversations do get strained and you can lose friends, but usually I want to focus on us instead of the other person. We often talk about how, oh, well, lost a friend of 35 years, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Well, how are you talking to them? How are you talking to them? So I think we are in some ways hardwired to get really defensive very quickly. So here's the future of Christian dialogue and work in North America right now. And it should have been just the normal dynamic anyway for Christians. We have to refuse to buy into the cultural nihilism surrounding us. Nihilism is hell-bent on destruction, destroying your opponent, vanquishing them, hurting them, damaging their reputation, destroying their institutions, killing them in some cases. You're hearing more and more violent speech. Christians need to be on principle opposed to that. And we also have to be willing to be the fools. I'm not saying we're idiots. I'm not saying we're dumb. I'm saying we have to be willing to look like fools to those who disagree with us sometimes. So if the cultural logic right now is fight to win, no matter what, and the Christian logic is love God supremely and love your neighbor as yourself, and that's not just some theological abstraction, and it doesn't preclude confrontation, by the way. It doesn't preclude being honest. It doesn't preclude being firm. It doesn't mean you're a pushover, but it means you're committed to the good of the other, the well-being of the other, not their destruction. It's going to change the way you talk to them. It's going to change that social dynamic. So people want deeper conversations. We need to be willing to have those uncomfortable conversations on those deep topics. And we need to be willing to look like fools sometimes, if necessary. It's better to be loving to somebody, to care for them and their well-being than it is to be right, in the sense that you just want to beat them over the head with the truth and use it as a cudgel.
Can just one thing there that's on that idea of truth and communication. You have this line in John that I think is important. The law came through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus. And so grace and truth are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they're best served together. And so I think that is one of the dynamics there that you're really leaning into, Cameron. That's a good reminder for us all, is that truth and grace work together out of the mouth and out of the lives of the Christian. And that disqualifies us from Schadenfreude, because that's not gracious. It disqualifies us from padding information that isn't quite true because it fits our narrative, because that isn't truth seeking. Both of those things have to go together. And I like how you outlined it there, of like, we're just operating with fundamentally different principles. And there will be times in which there are clashes from that, and we'll get scuffed up a little bit from it. But I don't see any other way to do this in a Christ-like way, who he himself got scuffed up because the principles at play there didn't match with the powers of the world in his time either. So be careful what you hope for. Don't be motivated out of fear. Seek truth and pursue it. But remember that truth and grace go together if we're to engage the world well in the way of Christ. And we might suffer for our love in some instances too. But by and large, orienting ourselves toward the other in a way that is truly seeking the good is a novel thing these days. And I think, Cameron, I like where you went with that. You said, hey, there's a phenomenal opportunity here for the church, because people are craving in-person interactions. And I hope you're already part of a diverse group of people who sit down in person at least once a week for worship and recalibration and discussion and conversation and study, education, in order to live well in a Christ-like way in a crazy time. And so, yeah, you probably didn't hear a whole lot of optimism in our voices for the future of us, by the power of humanism being able to sort ourselves out, but do hear us having a deep sense of excitement about what it is that God is doing in the world, because his ways are best. His means are best to his ends. And it's our job not to change the world, but to be faithful to what it is that he's asking us to do. And then we take it one day at a time from there and look back and give him the glory for the good that happens in it. And we repent for the chaos that we contribute to, and are grateful that he doesn't destroy his enemies immediately, or we'd be in trouble as well. So we can't reinvent the wheel here. We have to look to Christ for the way to live. You've been listening to Thinking Out Loud, a podcast where we think out loud about current events and Christian hope.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, book Nathan or Cameron, or if you'd like to support us financially, whether through a one-time donation or on a monthly basis, you can do so on the donate page at www.toltogether.com. That's toltogether.com. And please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and sharing this content with your friends. It really does help.